Have you ever inspected the lining of your vintage coat? The seams, the hidden pockets, the buttons sewn with precision by hands that may have harbored dark secrets? What if I told you that in a small Tennessee town over a century ago, a simple clothing examination revealed one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in American history? A case where the killer's signature wasn't just metaphorical, but literally stitched into his victim's final possessions. Before we continue with this chilling tale, I'd like to ask you to comment below where you're watching from. This channel needs your support to keep uncovering these forgotten dark chapters of history that others want to remain buried. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Your support helps us continue sharing these hidden stories. In the fall of 1910, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, was a prosperous textile town nestled in the Appalachian foothills. With a population just shy of 3,000, it was known for its merino wool production and the skilled craftspeople who transformed raw materials into garments sought after throughout the southeastern United States. The town's prosperity attracted investment, laborers, and a sense of optimism that seemed impenetrable until the disappearances began. The first to vanish was Eleanor Whitfield, aged 27, a school teacher who failed to appear for classes one Monday morning in September. Her boarding house room was found undisturbed, with no signs of struggle or packing for travel. Only her Sunday coat was missing, leading authorities to initially suspect she had simply left town unannounced, perhaps to meet a suitor her conservative community would have frowned upon. "I knew something was wrong immediately," wrote Martha Caulfield, the proprietress of the boarding house, in her journal that was later submitted as evidence. Eleanor was devoted to her students. She would never abandon them mid-term without so much as a note of explanation. And she left behind the locket containing her mother's portrait. She never went anywhere without it. 2 weeks later, Samuel Hargrove, 52, the town's respected bank manager, failed to return home from what should have been a routine trip to Knoxville. Again, nothing was missing except for his wool overcoat, which his wife insisted he had been wearing that morning. By November, 3 more residents had disappeared. Josephine Miller, 19, daughter of the mayor; Thomas Garrett, 34, a lumber mill foreman; and Ida Spencer, 41, the widowed owner of the town's most popular cafe. In each case, the pattern was identical. No signs of struggle, no personal possessions taken except for a coat or jacket, and no explanation. Oak Ridge descended into a state of collective paranoia. Children were kept home from school, businesses closed early, and armed citizen patrols roamed the streets after dark. The local sheriff, William Thornton, requested assistance from state authorities, but with no bodies, no crime scenes, and no concrete evidence of foul play, little help was forthcoming. "We are a town under siege by an invisible enemy," wrote Reverend James Hollister in the church bulletin that December. "We gather in prayer, but look upon our neighbors with suspicion. The shadow that has fallen over Oak Ridge has revealed how fragile our sense of security truly was." The breakthrough came not from law enforcement, but from 12-year-old Daniel Cooper, who discovered what adults had overlooked. On December 18, 1910, Daniel was helping his father unload donated items for the church charity drive when he recognized a familiar garment. "That's Miss Whitfield's coat," the boy reportedly said. "I know because of the blue jay feather pin she always wore on the lapel." The woolen coat, anonymously donated, indeed matched the description of Eleanor Whitfield's missing garment, though the distinctive pin had been removed. Reverend Hollister immediately contacted Sheriff Thornton, who took possession of the coat as potential evidence. It was during the sheriff's examination that the first macabre detail came to light. Inside the coat, beneath the lining that had been carefully opened and resewn, was a single brass button. Unlike the coat's original pearl buttons, this one was engraved with the initials EW, matching the victim's own initials. "I felt a chill unlike any winter cold," Sheriff Thornton later testified. It was as though the garment itself was trying to tell us who it belonged to, or worse, that someone wanted us to know. Within 24 hours, the sheriff organized a search of local charity boxes, church donations, and second-hand clothing stores. The effort yielded horrifying results. 4 more coats were discovered, each with the lining altered, and each containing a hidden button bearing the initials of one of the missing persons. The town council convened an emergency meeting, where Mayor Miller, himself grieving his missing daughter, authorized unprecedented measures. Every home and business in Oak Ridge would be searched, with particular attention to tailoring equipment, button-making tools, and any evidence of the missing residents. The search lasted 3 days and turned up nothing. Whoever had taken the victims and modified their clothing was not hiding evidence in plain sight. However, the investigation did reveal that all 5 coats had been donated to different locations by the same man, described as well-dressed, soft-spoken, and unremarkable, who gave his name as Edward Smith and claimed to be clearing out his deceased aunt's estate. No such death had been recorded in the county. By Christmas of 1910, Oak Ridge had transformed from a thriving industrial town to a community paralyzed by fear. Families who could afford to travel left for the holidays and never returned. The textile mill operated at half capacity as workers requested transfers to other company locations. Sheriff Thornton's office received dozens of reports daily of suspicious behavior, most amounting to nothing more than ordinary activities viewed through the lens of terror. "I no longer know who to trust," wrote Thomas Spencer, husband of missing cafe owner Ida, in a letter to his brother in Nashville. "Every friendly face could be hiding malice. Every kind word could be bait for a trap. I find myself examining the coats of strangers, looking for signs that they might be wearing what once belonged to my beloved Ida, not knowing whether to hope I find something or pray I don't." In January 1911, a 6th resident disappeared, Dr. Clive Richardson, the town's only physician. Again, only his coat was missing. This time, however, there was a witness. Richardson's nurse, Hannah Brewster, reported seeing him leave the clinic with a patient she didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, wearing a hat pulled low, just before closing time. "The gentleman seemed to be favoring his right hand," Brewster told authorities. Dr. Richardson mentioned he would need to suture a deep cut, and they would require privacy. "I offered to assist, but the doctor insisted he could manage alone and told me to go home early. That was the last time I saw him." 3 days after Richardson's disappearance, his coat appeared, folded neatly on the steps of the sheriff's office before dawn. Inside the lining was the now expected button, bearing the initials CR. This escalation, the killer now directly engaging with law enforcement, prompted state authorities to finally take serious interest in the case. Detective Conrad Sullivan of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation arrived in Oak Ridge on January 12th, bringing with him modern investigative techniques and a fresh perspective. "It appears we are dealing with a perpetrator who views these disappearances as some form of art or craftsmanship," Sullivan wrote in his preliminary report. "The precision of the alterations to the garments, the consistency of the signature, and the deliberate return of evidence suggests an individual who takes pride in his work and desires recognition, albeit in a coded form that only he fully understands." Sullivan's first action was to examine all 6 coats under proper laboratory conditions. His findings disturbed even the most hardened local officers. The buttons, which appeared to be ordinary brass at first glance, were actually made of bone, likely human, that had been treated, polished, and plated with a thin layer of metal. The engraving of initials had been done with surgical precision. More disturbing still, microscopic examination revealed traces of blood in the lining of each coat, blood that had been deliberately worked into the fabric rather than simply spilled upon it. "We are not merely looking for a killer," Sullivan informed the town council in a closed session. "We are hunting someone who believes he is creating something from his victims." The coats and buttons appear to be trophies, yes, but also transformative objects, as though the perpetrator is converting human life into wearable art. The investigation focused on individuals with surgical knowledge, metalworking skills, and tailoring ability, a seemingly impossible combination that nonetheless narrowed the field of suspects considerably. Sullivan compiled a list of 17 men who possessed at least 2 of these skill sets and began methodical interviews. Among them was Elias Wayland, 47, who had opened a small but exclusive tailoring shop in Oak Ridge 5 years earlier. Wayland was known for his exceptional craftsmanship, particularly in men's formal wear and ladies' winter coats. His clientele included the town's most prominent citizens, including all 6 of the missing persons. Wayland's background checked out impeccably. Born in Boston to a family of tailors, he had apprenticed with his father before studying surgical techniques during the Spanish-American War, where he had served as a medical assistant. After the war, he had worked briefly as a jeweler's assistant in New York before moving south for his health, claiming the mountain air helped his chronic respiratory condition. "Mr. Wayland has always been the soul of courtesy," declared Harriet Vandermeer, wife of the mill owner and one of Wayland's regular customers. "His attention to detail is unmatched, and he has a remarkable ability to create garments that complement one's figure perfectly. I cannot imagine him harming anyone." During his initial interview, Wayland was cooperative, expressing appropriate shock at the disappearances and offering his full assistance to the investigation. He pointed out that as the town's premier tailor, it was hardly surprising that all 6 missing persons had been his customers. "I clothe half the respectable folk in Oak Ridge," he reportedly told Detective Sullivan with a small, proud smile. "My hands have measured and fitted most of the people you're interviewing. It's the nature of my profession to be intimately familiar with the dimensions of my clients' bodies." The statement, innocent on its surface, struck Sullivan as oddly phrased. He made a note to revisit Wayland's shop under the pretense of ordering a suit for himself. On January 18th, Sullivan returned to Wayland's establishment as a customer. While being measured, he engaged the tailor in casual conversation about his craft. "I've always been fascinated by how different fabrics hold their shape," Sullivan remarked. "Some materials seem to have a memory all their own." Wayland's response sent a chill through the detective's spine. "All materials remember the hands that shaped them, detective," the tailor replied, his measuring tape wrapped around Sullivan's chest. "Wool, cotton, silk, flesh. The skilled craftsman leaves his mark, visible or invisible, on everything he touches. In my line of work, we call it the tailor's hand, the distinctive signature that identifies a garment's maker more surely than any label." Sullivan noted that Wayland seemed to take particular interest in his right hand, commenting on a small scar across the knuckles, the result of a childhood accident. "Imperfections tell stories, don't they?" Wayland mused. "I could incorporate that narrative into your suit if you wished. A special button, perhaps, with a design that echoes that scar. Something hidden that only you would know about. A secret between craftsman and client." Sullivan maintained his composure, scheduled a fitting for the following week, and immediately returned to his temporary office to organize a search warrant. His report convinced a local judge, and at dawn the next day, law enforcement descended on Wayland's shop and adjoining residence. The initial search revealed nothing incriminating. The shop was immaculate, the residence modest but well-appointed. Wayland, awakened by the officers, maintained his composure and continued to cooperate fully. It was only when Sullivan insisted on examining the cellar, accessed through a trapdoor concealed beneath a display cabinet in the shop, that Wayland's demeanor changed. "That's my private workroom," he protested, suddenly agitated. "No one goes down there." "The conditions must be precisely maintained for certain specialized techniques. Opening the door could ruin months of work." Sullivan was unmoved, and officers forced the trapdoor open, despite Wayland's increasingly desperate objections. What they found below defied immediate comprehension. The cellar had been converted into a workshop unlike anything the officers had ever seen. One section contained traditional tailoring equipment, cutting tables, steam presses, and forms for shaping garments. Another held surgical implements arranged with military precision on sterilized trays. A third area resembled a jeweler's bench, with delicate tools for metalwork and engraving, but it was the center of the room that caused even the most hardened officers to recoil. A large wooden table, similar to those used in morgues, dominated the space. Above it hung an elaborate system of hooks and pulleys. Around the perimeter stood glass cases containing what at first appeared to be unusually realistic mannequins. "They aren't mannequins," Sullivan would later testify. "They were human forms, preserved through some taxidermic process I'd never encountered before. Each wore a garment that appeared to be made not of cloth, but of treated and dyed human skin, fitted with buttons of bone. And on each button were the initials of the person the skin had once belonged to. The 6 missing residents of Oak Ridge had been found." When confronted with the evidence, Wayland made no attempt to deny his actions. Instead, he spoke with the pride of an artist explaining his masterpieces to an appreciative audience. "You must understand the limitation of ordinary materials," he told Sullivan, as officers led him away in handcuffs. "No wool, no silk, no cotton can truly capture the essence of the wearer. For a garment to be perfect, to be transcendent, it must be of the wearer. They are not dead, detective. They have been elevated, transformed. Their ordinary lives have become extraordinary art through my hands." Forensic examination of Wayland's workshop revealed how he had accomplished his grotesque craft. The victims had been sedated during fitting sessions, then later lured back to the shop and rendered unconscious. In the cellar, Wayland had performed his transformative work, a process too horrific to detail in contemporary newspaper accounts, but described in full in Sullivan's classified report to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The buttons sewn inside the victims' original coats, the ones that had been discovered earlier, were merely Wayland's first stage of transformation. By returning the altered coats to circulation, he had intended for them to find their way back to the victims' families. "A preview of my ultimate creation," he explained, "a way of preparing them to appreciate the final work when I was ready to reveal it." But why had Wayland chosen these particular victims? What connected a school teacher, a bank manager, a young woman, a mill foreman, a cafe owner, and a doctor? The answer emerged during Wayland's interrogation, revealing a twisted logic that had driven his selections. "I chose them for their skin," he said with unsettling calmness. "Each had a particular quality of texture, color, and resilience that I required for my collection. Mrs. Spencer, for instance, had remarkable forearms. Years of kneading dough had given her skin a suppleness I found nowhere else. And young Miss Miller had the most extraordinary complexion, translucent, almost luminescent in certain lights. Dr. Richardson's hands. You should have seen his hands before I transformed them. Surgeon's hands, steady and strong, with skin toughened by constant washing but still remarkably sensitive. Wayland was charged with 6 counts of murder in what newspapers delicately referred to as circumstances of unprecedented depravity. His trial was closed to the public, with testimony sealed by judicial order. He was found guilty on all counts in April 1911 and sentenced to death. The night before his scheduled execution at the state penitentiary in Nashville, Wayland made a final request to speak with Detective Sullivan. Against his better judgment, Sullivan agreed to the meeting. "I have a confession that may bring some comfort to the people of Oak Ridge," Wayland said, speaking through the bars of his death row cell. "I am not the first to practice my art, nor will I be the last. We are a brotherhood, you see, craftsmen who recognized long ago that true art requires the ultimate sacrifice. Sullivan dismissed this as the desperate fabrication of a condemned man, but Wayland continued. Look to the garments of power, detective. The robes of judges, the suits of presidents, the uniforms of generals. Examine them with a jeweler's loupe. You'll find our mark, tiny buttons hidden in the linings, bearing the initials of those who contributed their essence to the creation. Wayland was executed by hanging on May 7th, 1911. His final words were reported to be, "The finest materials never truly die, they merely change form." In the aftermath of the case, Oak Ridge struggled to recover its sense of community and safety. The victims were given proper burials, though the condition of the remains necessitated closed caskets. Wayland's workshop was demolished, the site covered with concrete, and eventually built over with a new post office. His shop inventory, hundreds of garments made for unsuspecting customers, was burned in a public ceremony meant to cleanse the town of his influence. Detective Sullivan, troubled by Wayland's final claims, conducted a quiet investigation into the brotherhood the killer had described. He found nothing conclusive, though his personal journals, unsealed 50 years after his death, indicate he continued to examine the formal wear of prominent figures whenever the opportunity arose. "I have become like the paranoid citizens of Oak Ridge," Sullivan wrote in 1925, 14 years after the case. "At every official function, every government ceremony, my eyes are drawn not to faces, but to garments. I find myself wondering about the provenance of the president's magnificent overcoat, about the unusual luster of the governor's suit jacket, and sometimes, in certain lights, I could swear I see the fabric move in ways that cloth should not, as though it remembers a different form, a different purpose." The case faded from public memory as the decades passed. Oak Ridge eventually recovered, the textile mill expanded, and new generations grew up unaware of the horror that had once visited their town. The physical records of the investigation were stored in the state archives, then transferred to microfilm, and finally digitized in the early 21st century, where they caught the attention of historical researchers who recognized the case's significance in the development of forensic science. But questions remain. Wayland's techniques, particularly his methods of preservation, were documented as being far advanced for the time, suggesting specialized knowledge beyond what his background could explain. And though officers searched the cellar workshop thoroughly, they never located the tools used to craft the bone buttons, nor did they find any trace of the victim's original clothing beyond the coats that had been returned to circulation. Most troubling of all, investigators never determined how Wayland had procured the brass plating for the buttons. The town had no metalworks that could have supplied such materials, and shipping records showed no deliveries of brass to Wayland's shop. It was as though the metal had appeared from nowhere or had been supplied by someone else. In 2004, during renovations to the Oak Ridge post office, workers breaking through the concrete foundation discovered a sealed metal box that had somehow been missed during the original demolition of Wayland's workshop. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with detailed diagrams, measurements, and notes, all written in a cipher that has yet to be fully decrypted. The journal contained only one passage in plain English, written on the inside cover: "To my brothers in craft, scattered across this great nation, our work continues. The materials are plentiful, the techniques perfected. When the time comes for the final collection to be revealed, the world will at last understand the true purpose of our art. Until then, seek the mark." E.W. The initials, identical to those found on Eleanor Whitfield's button, have led some researchers to question whether Elias Wayland was the killer's actual name or merely another layer of his elaborate signature. More disturbing still is the discovery made by textile conservators examining vintage clothing collections in museums across the southeastern United States. In 2017, a routine preservation assessment of early 20th century garments revealed that 7 formal coats, all dating between 1900 and 1915, and all originally owned by prominent political or business leaders, contained hidden bone buttons bearing initials that matched no record of the coat's makers or owners. The buttons were found in the same location as those in the Oak Ridge case, sewn into the linings, invisible except to those who knew precisely where to look. And perhaps most unsettling, when subjected to modern DNA analysis, the bone material in these buttons did not match any single individual. Instead, each button contained genetic material from multiple sources, combined through a process that modern science cannot explain. The Oak Ridge Taylor case remains officially closed, its perpetrator long dead, but some investigators continue to pursue the possibility that Elias Wayland was merely one member of a network, a brotherhood, as he called it, whose work may have continued undetected for generations. Those investigators have one piece of advice for anyone who acquires vintage clothing. Examine the lining carefully. Check for signs of alterations, for seams that have been opened and resewn. And if you find a button where no button should be, do not touch it with your bare hands. For some craftsmanship is more than art. Some materials remember, and some marks never truly fade. Have you checked the lining of your coat lately? Turn to God and Jesus Christ, for only in their light can such darkness be truly banished. The greatest protection against evil is faith that transcends the material world, a truth that the people of Oak Ridge eventually rediscovered as they rebuilt their community on a foundation of spiritual strength rather than material prosperity. What would you do if you discovered that an antique garment in your possession contained evidence of historic atrocities? Would you turn it over to authorities, destroy it, or become obsessed with uncovering the truth behind its creation? For Sarah Thornton, a direct descendant of Oak Ridge's former sheriff, this hypothetical question became a devastating reality when she inherited a family trunk containing case materials never made public, including fabric samples that should have been destroyed over a century ago. Before I continue with Sarah's disturbing journey, please take a moment to comment where you're watching from. Your engagement helps this channel continue to uncover these hidden historical horrors. Subscribe now to join our community dedicated to preserving these dark warnings from the past. In 2018, over a century after the Oak Ridge Taylor case was officially closed, Sarah Thornton was clearing out her late grandmother's attic in Nashville when she discovered a locked steamer trunk bearing her great-great-grandfather's name. William Thornton, Sheriff of Oak Ridge County, 1905 to 1912. Sarah, 34, was a professor of textile conservation at Vanderbilt University, specializing in 19th and early 20th century American garment construction. The coincidence seemed almost providential, a textile expert discovering a trunk potentially containing century-old fabric samples. What she couldn't have known was how this discovery would unravel not only historical mysteries, but her own life as well. I remember the excitement I felt when I found the key taped to the bottom of the trunk, Sarah later wrote in her private journal. Academic curiosity quickly gave way to horror. Had I known what those materials would reveal, and what finding them would cost me, I would have resealed the trunk and buried it deeper than my ancestors ever could have imagined. Inside the trunk, beneath layers of official documentation relating to routine police matters, lay a false bottom. When removed, it revealed a collection of items that Sheriff Thornton had apparently concealed from official records. Fabric swatches carefully preserved between sheets of acid-free paper, a small journal written in a meticulous hand, and 7 brass-plated buttons, each bearing different initials, sealed in individual glass vials. A letter addressed to my future descendant explained the sheriff's actions. I withhold these items from official evidence with the gravest misgivings, but greater concern for public welfare. Detective Sullivan believes the Wayland case concluded with the perpetrator's execution, but I cannot share his certainty. The enclosed journal was found in Wayland's personal quarters, separate from his workshop journals that were submitted as evidence. It contains correspondences that suggest a network far more extensive than one deranged tailor in a small Tennessee town. The fabric samples were taken from garments in various stages of completion, found hidden beneath the floorboards of Wayland's shop after the initial investigation concluded. The buttons require special attention. 6 correspond to our known victims. The 7th, bearing the initials AW, has no match among Oak Ridge's missing persons. I fear it represents either an undiscovered victim or, more troublingly, another practitioner of Wayland's abhorrent craft. I entrust these materials to my bloodline rather than the official record because I have come to believe that certain powerful individuals may be complicit in concealing the full scope of these crimes. Should these materials be discovered by the wrong eyes, they would surely be destroyed. May God forgive me if I have erred in this decision. May my descendants have the wisdom to know what must be done with this burden I reluctantly pass to them. The letter was dated August 19th, 1911, 3 months after Wayland's execution. Sarah, with her professional background, immediately recognized the scientific value of the materials. The fabric samples represented preservation techniques unknown in the documented history of textile conservation. The journal, written in a cipher similar to but distinct from the one found in Wayland's workshop journal, contained what appeared to be correspondence dates spanning from 1896 to 1910, suggesting a long-term network of communication. But it was the buttons that drew her deepest professional curiosity. As a textile conservator, she had access to Vanderbilt University's Advanced Materials Analysis Laboratory. Without revealing their provenance, she submitted one button, the mysterious AW specimen, for compositional analysis. The results defied conventional explanation. The bone component contained human DNA, as expected based on the historical records of the case. However, the brass plating was unlike any metal alloy documented in early 20th century American manufacturing. It contained trace elements of metals that would not be used in commercial alloys until the 1970s. I keep reviewing the analysis, looking for procedural errors, Sarah noted in her research journal. Either the lab has made a significant mistake, or the metallurgical knowledge of Wayland and his potential associates was decades ahead of documented industrial capabilities. Neither explanation seems plausible, yet the evidence exists in my hands. Sarah's academic instincts compelled her to continue investigating, though she maintained absolute secrecy about the source of her materials. She began cross-referencing the dates and cryptic location references in the cipher journal with historical records of unsolved disappearances across the United States between 1890 and 1920. A pattern emerged, clusters of 3 to 7 disappearances in towns with textile manufacturing connections, always following the same pattern. No bodies discovered, victims from diverse social backgrounds with no apparent connection to each other, and cases eventually abandoned as unsolved. These clusters appeared in widely separated locations: Lowell, Massachusetts, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Greensboro, North Carolina, and smaller manufacturing centers across the nation. Most significantly, each cluster was preceded by the arrival of a new tailor, jeweler, or leather worker in the community, typically 1 to 2 years before the disappearances began. They established themselves first, Sarah theorized in her notes, built reputations for exceptional craftsmanship, gained the trust of the community's elite, secured a customer base that included their eventual targets. The patience exhibited suggests individuals with extraordinary self-control and long-term planning capabilities, not the impulsive behavior typically associated with serial killers. In March 2019, Sarah's research led her to the Museum of American Industrial History in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where which housed a collection of business records from textile manufacturers dating back to the 1870s. Among these records were correspondence files from the National Association of Master Tailors, a professional organization active from 1865 to 1922. With permission to access these archived materials, Sarah discovered something that chilled her: a membership directory from 1905 listing an Elias Wayland of Boston, Massachusetts, 3 years before he appeared in Tennessee. More disturbing was a coded message in the margins next to his name, written in a cipher visually similar to the one in the journal she had found. The archivist assumed it was a notation about membership dues or professional certification. Sarah later recounted to the only colleague she eventually confided in, but I recognized it immediately. It was the same cipher, the same hand. The network wasn't just real. It had operated within the structures of legitimate professional organizations. Sarah photographed the directory page and spent weeks working to break the cipher, using the partial decryption she had managed from her great-great-grandfather's materials as a starting point. When she finally succeeded, the decoded message was brief but horrifying. EW relocated to secondary site for project vestment. Primary materials acquired from 7 sources in current location deemed insufficient for Phase 2 requirements. Southern climate may yield superior preservation results. Report expected autumn 1910. The implication was clear. Wayland had moved to Tennessee specifically to continue work that had begun elsewhere under the direction or at least knowledge of others in the association. Sarah's investigation took on new urgency. She applied for research grants to visit other archives holding records of the National Association of Master Tailors, concentrating on branches in cities where she had identified disappearance clusters. In each location, she found similar coded margin notes next to certain members' names. When deciphered, they painted a picture of a coordinated effort spanning decades and involving at least 23 tailors in 17 states. The communications referred repeatedly to the collection, the transformation, and most frequently, the final garment. In June 2019, Sarah's research brought her to Charleston, South Carolina, where the local historical society maintained records of a tailoring business that had operated from 1892 to 1917. The proprietor, Arthur Whitaker, had been a contemporary of Wayland and a member of the same professional association. Among the business records was a leather-bound appointment book for the year 1911. In entries dated after Wayland's execution, Sarah found a series of cryptic notations: materials from TN project salvaged, buttons redistributed to brothers, and most alarmingly, EW sacrifice necessary but principles preserved. The final entry, dated December 31, 1911, read simply, "The work continues, the pattern advances. What is cut away will be remade." Sarah was now convinced that Wayland had been part of an organized network that had continued operating after his death. But what was the pattern? What final creation were these craftsmen working toward over so many decades? The answer came from an unexpected source. While in Charleston, Sarah visited a small private museum of historical clothing run by the descendants of a prominent textile family. Among their collection was a ceremonial robe reportedly worn by the founder of a now defunct fraternal order called the Guild of the New Covenant, active from 1880 to 1925. The robe, displayed behind glass, was described as being made of specially treated leather of remarkable durability and suppleness. The craftsmanship was attributed to master tailors from across the United States who had contributed sections over many years, with the final assembly completed in 1917. "I knew immediately what I was looking at," Sarah later wrote. The leather had that same uncanny quality described in the Oak Ridge case files, like skin that had been transformed but somehow retained a lifelike quality. The brass fixtures on the robe bore decorative elements, identical to the unusual alloy composition I'd found in the button. This wasn't just a ceremonial garment, it was a culmination of decades of harvesting and craftsmanship by Wayland's associates. The museum curator, noting Sarah's professional interest, proudly showed her the inside of the garment, where a series of maker's marks had been stamped into the lining, 23 sets of initials arranged in a precise geometric pattern. EW was among them, positioned at what Sarah recognized as a mathematically significant node in the pattern. Each master contributed according to their specialty, the curator explained, unaware of the garment's true nature. Some worked the leather to achieve its remarkable texture. Others handled the metalwork or structural elements. The founder wore it only on the highest ceremonial occasions. Family law claims he believed it conveyed special powers, that wearing it allowed him to absorb the collected wisdom and strength of all who had contributed to its creation. Sarah maintained her professional composure while photographing the garment with permission, but returned to her hotel room physically ill. The implications were too horrific to process. Not only had the Brotherhood Wayland mentioned been real, but they had completed at least one major project using their victims' remains, a garment worn by someone who understood and valued its true origin. That night, Sarah emailed select photographs and notes to her home address, creating a backup of her research away from her physical materials. The precaution would prove prescient. When she returned to her hotel room the following evening, she found it had been searched with professional precision. Her laptop was present, but had been accessed. The physical notebook containing her cipher notes was missing. Most disturbing of all, on the bathroom mirror, someone had used her lipstick to draw a simple symbol, a button with the initials ST. Sarah checked out immediately, changed her return flight, and drove 3 hours to a different airport in North Carolina. During that drive, she called the only person she felt she could trust with the truth. Her former doctoral advisor, Dr. Marcus Reynolds, now retired from Vanderbilt but still active in textile conservation circles. The way she described it, I initially thought Sarah was having some kind of breakdown, Dr. Reynolds later told investigators. The academic pressure, the isolation of deep archival work, I've seen it trigger episodes in researchers before. But then she started sending me photographs, documentation. The evidence was compelling, the analysis methodologically sound. Whatever she'd stumbled upon was very real and had frightened one of the most level-headed researchers I've ever mentored. Sarah arrived back in Nashville on June 15, 2019. That same day, she placed all her research materials, including the original contents of Sheriff Thornton's hidden compartment, in a safe deposit box, giving Dr. Reynolds the second key. She then filed a comprehensive research report with the FBI's Historical Crimes Division, detailing her findings about what appeared to be a century-spanning conspiracy of murderers disguised as craftsmen. 3 days later, her apartment was broken into while she was on campus. Unlike her hotel room, this search was violent and destructive. Her computer was stolen, papers scattered, and furniture slashed. On her bedroom wall, the same button symbol with her initials had been painted in what forensic analysis would later confirm was animal blood. Campus police, responding to her emergency call, advised Sarah to stay with friends while the break-in was investigated. She agreed, but instead checked into a hotel under a false name, contacting only Dr. Reynolds with her location. She was rational but terrified, Reynolds recounted. She believed that by decoding the ciphers and connecting the historical dots, she had done exactly what her great-great-grandfather had feared, drawn the attention of people who wanted this history to remain buried. On June 22nd, Sarah missed a scheduled check-in call with Reynolds. Concerned, he went to her hotel, only to find she had not returned the previous night. Her room contained her belongings, but showed no signs of struggle. Her rental car remained in the parking lot. Security footage showed her leaving voluntarily at 7:30 the previous evening, wearing a light jacket despite the summer heat, accompanied by a well-dressed older man she appeared to know. The Nashville police, initially skeptical of Reynolds' concerns given the historical nature of Sarah's research, changed their assessment upon reviewing her FBI report and the evidence of targeted harassment. A missing persons investigation was launched, with detectives noting the disturbing parallel to the historical case she had been researching. A disappearance with no signs of struggle, the missing person last seen wearing a coat. 2 days into the investigation, Sarah's jacket was found in a donation bin at a church charity drive 3 counties away. When police examined the garment, they found what they initially believed was a manufacturing defect, a small, hard object sewn into the lining near the left shoulder. When the lining was opened, they discovered a brass-plated button bearing the initials ST. Forensic analysis confirmed it was made of bone. DNA testing matched it to Sarah Thornton. But unlike the historical buttons, which had been created after the victims' deaths, the cellular material in Sarah's button showed signs of having been harvested while she was still alive. The FBI's Historical Crimes Division took over the case, now classified as both a kidnapping and a suspected homicide, with potential connections to organized criminal activity spanning multiple generations. The investigation expanded to include searches of membership records for any modern organizations, with links to the historical Guild of the New Covenant or the National Association of Master Tailors. What they discovered suggested that the network had never disbanded. It had merely adapted. 3 current high-end tailoring establishments across the United States were owned by direct descendants of individuals Sarah had identified in her research as likely members of the original Brotherhood. All 3 businesses specialized in custom garments for wealthy and influential clients, with waiting lists extending years for their services. More disturbing were the client lists for these establishments obtained through search warrants. They included current political figures, business leaders, and celebrities, all of whom had commissioned garments with proprietary materials at costs exceeding $100,000 per item. The historical case and Sarah Thornton's disappearance appear to be connected by more than methodology, stated the confidential FBI briefing document later leaked to investigative journalists. We are potentially looking at a multi-generational criminal enterprise that has evolved from the isolated actions of deranged individuals into a structured organization providing specialized products to clients who may or may not understand their true nature. In August 2019, FBI agents raided a warehouse registered to one of the tailoring establishments, located in a remote area outside Denver, Colorado. What they discovered has never been fully disclosed to the public, but leaked reports describe processing facilities and preservation chambers containing human remains in various stages of transformation. Most significantly, they found a climate-controlled vault containing what appeared to be works in progress, garments made from materials that DNA testing confirmed came from multiple missing persons, including partial matches to Sarah Thornton. No complete garments were discovered, leading investigators to believe the finished products had already been delivered to clients. Determining who possessed these items became the focus of a nationwide investigation that continues to this day. 3 arrests were made in connection with the warehouse operation. All 3 suspects, master tailors from prestigious establishments in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco, were found dead in their cells within weeks of their arrests. Each died by different means, but all 3 bodies exhibited the same unexplained post-mortem anomaly, a perfect incision behind the right ear, approximately 1 inch long, that had not been present during their intake medical examinations. The investigation hit a significant obstacle in October 2019, when a federal judge sealed all records related to the case, citing national security concerns, and potential diplomatic complications. The decision came after representatives from the State Department intervened in the proceedings through classified channels. Journalists attempting to follow the case reported unusual difficulties, sources suddenly refusing to speak, documents becoming inaccessible, and in 2 instances, newsroom servers containing research materials suffering catastrophic failures that erased months of work. Dr. Marcus Reynolds, who had gone public with Sarah's research after her disappearance, died in a single-car accident in November 2019. Accident investigators noted that the vehicle's brake lines showed signs of tampering, but the case was closed when key evidence disappeared from police storage facilities. In January 2020, an anonymous package arrived at the offices of a prominent investigative journalism outlet. It contained a USB drive with a single video file, footage of what appeared to be a private ceremony involving 12 individuals wearing elaborate robes made of material that the accompanying documentation claimed was processed human skin. The individuals' faces were not visible, but voice analysis suggested they included current high-ranking officials in government, finance, and industry. The video was never published. The journalism organization's headquarters experienced a devastating fire the night after the package was delivered, destroying all digital storage systems. 3 journalists who had viewed the footage died in the blaze. Sarah Thornton has never been found. The safe deposit box containing her great-great-grandfather's evidence was emptied by an unknown individual using a key and forged authorization 2 days after her disappearance. The only remaining evidence of her research exists in fragmented emails and the testimony of colleagues who glimpsed portions of her work before it was suppressed. In March 2021, a routine inventory at the Museum of American Industrial History discovered that the 19th-century tailor's directory Sarah had examined 2 years earlier was missing, replaced with a virtually identical reproduction lacking the coded marginalia she had documented. That same month, the small Charleston Museum, housing the ceremonial robe, closed permanently after its wealthy patron unexpectedly withdrew all financial support. The collection was purchased by a private collector whose identity remains shielded by multiple shell corporations. Its current location is unknown. The FBI's Historical Crimes Division was reorganized in June 2021, with the agents who had led the warehouse investigation reassigned to field offices across the country. The case officially remains open, but inactive. In September 2022, a package addressed to Dr. Reynolds's next of kin was delivered by private courier. Though Reynolds had died 3 years earlier, the package, postmarked just 2 weeks before delivery, contained what appeared to be a final message from him. What Sarah discovered was merely the visible portion of a structure that extends far deeper into our society than anyone could imagine. The craft continues, the pattern advances, but now I know its purpose, and that knowledge has sealed my fate. Look to those who wear power as comfortably as a second skin. Look to those who never seem to age as their contemporaries wither. The garments aren't mere symbols of status, they are vessels of transformation, and those who wear them are no longer entirely human. The letter was signed with Reynolds's name, but included a postscript in different handwriting. The buttons are the key, they bind the wearer to the worn. What was separate becomes unified. What was dead lives again through new flesh. The final garment approaches completion. Forensic analysis confirmed the postscript was written in Sarah Thornton's hand. In 2024, the century-old Oak Ridge case and its modern connection have been largely forgotten by the public, overshadowed by more immediate crises and concerns. The disappearance of a textile conservator researching obscure historical crimes barely registers as a footnote in criminal history. But in certain exclusive tailoring establishments across America, customers who know the right words, who can afford the extraordinary prices, who understand the true value of proprietary materials, can commission garments of remarkable qualities. Items that seem to enhance the wearer's vitality, that move with uncanny naturalness, that never wear out or lose their perfect fit. And if those customers were to examine their purchases with sufficient care, they might find small, nearly invisible marks inside the linings, brass-plated buttons bearing the initials of people who disappeared without a trace. The brotherhood that Elias Wayland spoke of in 1911 has not vanished. It has evolved, adapted, and integrated itself into the highest levels of power and influence. The tailors may use different tools, employ more sophisticated methods, and operate with greater discretion, but their fundamental craft remains unchanged: the transformation of human life into wearable art for those privileged enough to know of its existence. In her final verified email sent to Dr. Reynolds hours before her disappearance, Sarah Thornton wrote, "I finally understand what the pattern is. It's not just a design for a garment, it's a blueprint for transformation on a scale I can hardly comprehend. Each button, each piece of material they collect, is part of something larger. The final garment isn't meant for a single wearer, it's meant for us all." The investigation into Sarah Thornton's disappearance continues officially, but with diminishing resources and priority. Her name appears on missing persons databases, her face on occasionally refreshed posters and digital alerts. But those who remember her case understand an uncomfortable truth. Some mysteries are buried not because they cannot be solved, but because their solutions would unravel the very fabric of society. If you own vintage clothing, particularly formal wear that seems unusually well preserved for its age, experts now recommend a simple precaution: check the linings thoroughly. Look for signs of alterations, for unusual materials, for anything sewn into seams or hidden beneath labels. And if you find a button where no button should be, especially one that bears initials, do not touch it. Do not attempt to remove it. Set the garment aside and contact authorities immediately, for in the words of Elias Wayland, spoken over a century ago, the finest materials never truly die, they merely change form. And sometimes they wait patiently to be worn again. Remember that only through faith in God and Jesus Christ can we find true protection against such darkness. When confronted with evil of this magnitude, evil that has woven itself into the very structures of power, spiritual armor becomes our most essential defense. The people of Oak Ridge ultimately rebuilt their community through faith, and in these uncertain times, we would be wise to follow their example. Have you checked your vintage clothing lately? The answer might be stitched into the very fabric of our reality.